And good morning. My name is Ryan Belmore. I am the owner and publisher of What's Up Noop. And it is just past 11:30 on Wednesday, October 7th. Yesterday, there was a big old event. Rhode Island Kids Count did a presentation, and it looked at the data in Newport Data in your backyard, and it was an event. And Frank Prosnitz is joining me today for this conversation. How are you, Frank?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing all right. And we're going to dive into some data today. We're always excited to talk about this topic, have a conversation about this topic. We've done a lot of reporting on this topic. And let's see if I can do this right. And joining us today for this conversation is Stephanie Geller. She is a deputy director at Rhode Island Kids Count. And good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning to you both. It's great to be here.
Good morning.
Great to have you as well. And I sat through the presentation yesterday, and there's so much data that came from it. And I know you don't have control of the screen today, and it's so much easier for people to actually see charts sometimes. I know it is for me. And we'll talk about how people can see those if they want to. But I guess we have to start with the very basics recap of what Rhode Island Kids Count is and why you're presenting this data.
Sure. So Rhode Island Kids Count is a statewide children's policy and research advocacy organization, and we put out every year the Rhode Island Kids Count Fact Book. And the data in your backyard presentations are really an effort to bring the data into individual communities so that community members, everyone from superintendents to mayors to community leaders, can really look at the data, identify areas where they can celebrate improvements in child and family well-being, and identify areas of concern where they can work together to try to improve those areas.
When was the data collected for this?
So our fact book came out in April, as it does every year, and the data is primarily data from 2019. So as I'm sure is part of the reason for your question, it is really data from prior to the pandemic. So there was a lot of conversation during the presentation yesterday about where kids were in 2019 and what we might expect in terms of additional concerns related to loss of employment and loss of various kinds of benefits for kids and families that we need to pay attention to now.
And to help people understand, did Rhode Island Kids Count do every community in Rhode Island, or is Newport an exception and a selection this year?
So every year we do a few of these in different communities. Newport has been historically a community that's asked us to do this for many years in a row. I think I've been there probably for 10 years going to visit Newport and do these presentations. The Newport Partnership for Families has been a great partner. They really bring together a lot of both nonprofit and for-profit organizations and government agencies really to look at the data and not just listen to a presentation, but then have follow-up meetings to act on the data. So in the past, we've identified issues, everything from child abuse and neglect rates to chronic absence, and then they've acted as a group to identify strategies to improve those areas.
How successful in the past has the community and as the state as a whole been able to address some of the problems that have been addressed by Kids Count?
So yeah, I guess there's been some positives and some negatives. Some problems are obviously stubborn and take multiple years to really act on. Chronic absence is one of those issues. Both the state as a whole and Newport have seen stubbornly high rates of chronic absenteeism, both among younger kids and older children. Although there have been some really wonderful efforts to address it through issues like trying to raise awareness about the importance of attending school, even in the early grades. People think kindergarten is a year to play, but it's a year to really build social emotional skills, literacy skills, math skills. And also to address the underlying reasons why kids don't go to school, whether it's lack of transportation. A kid doesn't have appropriate boots or coats to wear in the winter, and so his or her parents don't send him to school. They may be facing housing instability. So some of those are stubborn problems. And chronic absenteeism may be like the canary in the coal mine, really pointing out a big issue that takes maybe multiple agencies and multiple years to address. So that is a problem we continue to work on both statewide and in Newport.
Stephanie, you said you've been doing this for the last couple of years here with Newport. Looking at the data used for this report, what was your biggest takeaway from it?
So I guess I would say that Newport, I think a lot of people who don't live in Newport think of Newport as, a wealthy community with mansions and restaurants and hotels, and don't really realize the enormous needs that we see in Newport, particularly in a community where so many people work in the service industry at relatively low paid jobs. So I think a lot of people outside of Newport, maybe less so in the community itself, are surprised by how many children and families are living in poverty or are really trying to survive in very low incomes. And a lot of the data are coming out of that fact. So we see almost 1 in 4 children in Newport are living in poverty, and about 2/3 of children are considered low income or eligible for free and reduced price meals in schools. And that's really not that far below the communities in our urban areas like Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket, where everyone I think knows that those are communities with high needs, but I don't think everyone understands the high needs in Newport. So we see a lot of problems that are often common in areas with high poverty, including increased incidence of child neglect and abuse because people can't afford adequate housing, childcare, et cetera. And we see also issues like chronic absence that I reported, where people are experiencing these challenges that result in their kids not being able to always go to school without additional support to address those issues.
Can you help me understand what might appear to be a disparity in figures, but maybe not? Mm-hmm. That on the one hand, we say there are 23.3% Newport children living in families of poverty, and then we say that 68% of Newport Public School students are from low-income families. How do we resolve that?
Yeah, so that's a really important issue. So I'm glad you asked, so I can go into that in more detail. So normally kids are eligible for free and reduced price breakfast, lunch, meals if they make below 185% of the federal poverty level. So the poverty level is obviously 100% of the poverty level. So there are many families that are in that area between 100 and 185%, and that's really that difference between the 23% below 100% and the larger 68%. That includes the up to 185. Also, the 23% is all kids in Newport. You would imagine that kids in families with higher incomes might tend to send them to private schools. So there tends to be a higher rate of poverty or low-income families in the Newport Public Schools compared to the community as a whole.
Go ahead, Ryan.
No, I think you're on a roll, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to get up front here quickly what your expectations are of the changes that might come about as a result of the pandemic.
So I actually did share some really important data from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a national think tank that's really been looking at data from the U.S. Census, a weekly survey they do called the Census Pulse Survey, where they are asking people about things like, are you having difficulty providing food for your family? Are you at risk of being evicted or losing your home? And it shows that there are much higher rates of both of those things, of not having enough food and being at risk of losing your home if you're a household with children versus a household without children. So children and families are at greater risk than adult households, and also shows really large disparities in need by race and ethnicity. So we see children of color, families of color, more likely to be experiencing those hardships. And we expect that to be the same in Newport and in Rhode Island.
Now, Stephanie, you, as well as Rhode Island Kids Count, did a presentation yesterday presenting the data. You're doing a larger deep dive into it on Thursday, which we can get the information out for everybody. What has the reaction been? If you have any reaction from local officials or organizations, how are people responding to the report that you put out?
So I mean, there was a really lively conversation, as I know you heard, on yesterday's Zoom event. Usually we're doing these events in person, obviously, and so it's a different kind of event. But we tried to make it as close as we could to that kind of event on Zoom as we do when it's an in-person event. And there were a lot of people weighing in about concerns that they're seeing and also about projects that they're implementing to try to address some of these concerns. So the superintendent, Colleen Germain, for example, talked about some really good work that's happening to address chronic absence at all the different levels. She talked about the enormous growth they're seeing in multilingual learners or English learners in Newport, and about the efforts they're putting in place to address those needs by hiring more teachers who are certified to teach English learners. And many of the community providers, those that provide mental health services and other kinds of services, weighed in about what they're doing. And really, that's, I think, the magic of this whole Newport Partnership for Families, is it's pulling together. We don't think of issues like chronic absence as being an issue that the school can face alone, but really an issue that needs the whole community around it. And that's the beauty of the partnership, and the fact that they're having this meeting tomorrow, really to gather together as a community to see how organizations that address basic needs, mental health, healthcare, the school, the city, can all gather together to really tackle some of these problems and develop strategies, work groups, et cetera, to move these, hopefully improve child and family well-being in Newport.
Stephanie, Rhode Island Kids Count provides data, provides facts, but do they provide opinion or solutions to how to make that data go the right way?
We do often share information about best practices across the country and from other communities in Rhode Island, and connect people to resources. So, we have over the years worked with Newport on everything from, increasing third grade reading to chronic absence, to really share what communities across the country have done to successfully tackle those problems. So we do present, the data, but we also do share some recommendations or strategies that have been shown to be effective elsewhere that might be employed in Newport.
While the data, I think, in a lot of ways may be alarming or shocking to people who may not really be, even to Newporters, actually, they probably don't see it as a whole. If you trace back the years, is Newport improving, getting worse, or pretty much staying the same?
I guess it would depend on the area. I mean, we in Rhode Island Kids Count, we've always had this idea of what we call the core cities, or the communities with the highest child poverty rates. And it used to be that right now that we only call those communities, we only have 4 communities we call that, of Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Newport. And Woonsocket, because they have by far the highest child poverty rates, with more than a third of children living in poverty generally. But when I started at Rhode Island Kids Count, other communities, including West Warwick and Newport, were also considered core cities. So there was sort of a less of a gap between what we were seeing in communities like West Warwick and Newport and those 4 communities. So there appeared to have been an improvement in the poverty rate in Newport, but we still see, many people who, as I said, are in that area right above and who are continuing to experience those problems. We've seen really stubbornly high rates of child abuse and neglect and chronic absence, as an example. There are, of course, some really positive things too. One of the things I highlighted in the presentation was there's been a pretty big jump in immediate college enrollment in Newport. I believe it was for the most recent class we looked at, the class of 2018. I believe it was 62%.
62%.
Yeah, 62% of high school graduates went directly on to college, which was a big jump from the prior year where only 50% did. Probably in part due to the availability of the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship, which allows for children to go directly from high school into college and attend the Community College of Rhode Island for free, and the availability of a campus right there in the community. I'm guessing that is a big part of it. So it's, that is a really positive thing and something we need to keep an eye on. That program is not guaranteed to continue forever. And we know, CCRI is struggling with economically during the pandemic, and that we might see changes over time. So we need to continue to both look at problems, but also look at where things are improving and why, and continue to provide those investments so we can sustain those improvements.
I know that you track the number of kids in school who are considered homeless, and well, I don't want to go into that definition a little bit because it differs probably from town to town and person to person. How does Newport stack up?
So just to give the listeners the difference, we collect information on homeless children. We define them in 2 different ways. We both look at homeless children and families who are living in homeless shelters, and we also look at children who are identified by public school personnel as being homeless. The federal McKinney-Vento law requires that education personnel use a broader definition of homelessness, not just those living in shelters, but also those living in hotels or motels, and those who may be what is often called doubled up, or living with another family for economic reasons, like sleeping on the living room floor with their whole family.
Sometimes called couch surfing.
Yes, exactly. Obviously, when you have a family, you need multiple couches, but sometimes people sleeping all over the place in a living room. And, you can imagine the effect that has on kids' health, emotional well-being, and ability to do well in school. So Newport is fortunate to be one of the communities that gets a little bit of extra funding to identify kids in schools. In the most recent year, the 2018-2019 school year, they identified 82 children who were experiencing homelessness. Again, a combination of kids who are doubled up, who may be living in cars or on the street, hotels, motels, or in shelters. And Newport does have a higher number of those kids than many other communities.
What's the number statewide?
I believe it was 1,475.
Yeah, I thought it was around 1,500.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah, so it's and it's really nationally, it's been a number that's been going up. And it's a great concern, especially now with so many kids either doing distance learning or doing a hybrid model of how you would really participate in school effectively if you're sharing a home with somebody else, don't have adequate access to computers or internet access, living in a shelter, or hopefully not, but some living in cars or on the street.
The other piece that jumped out at me real quickly, which may be connected to that, is a high rates of child neglect and abuse, in which you noted that in 2019, there were 108 Newport children who were victims of child neglect, that up from 93 previously. But I also wonder whether there are a huge number that are just not reported.
Yeah, so that's been a topic of a lot of conversation in Newport. I have to say, visiting other communities, Newport has been really exceptional in terms of the collaboration I see among community agencies, and really the wealth of resources out there for families. So there's been some discussion about whether the fact that Newport has higher rates might be in part related to higher reporting, because kids are touched by so many different systems. They might be more likely to be reported than in a community where there aren't so many resources that might be touching the child and family. But obviously that's not the whole picture. There are kids who are being neglected and are being abused. Much of that is connected to lack of resources. Statewide, about 80% of child neglect and abuse cases are actually neglect. So this is really kids in families who may be making hard choices, like leaving kids at home alone while they go to work because they can't afford childcare, or who may not be able to provide adequate housing, and those kinds of issues that are often connected to poverty and lack of resources.
And interesting, out of your data was Newport's reported child neglect and abuse victim rate is the third highest in the state. Now, when you get data like that and you do data in your backyards for other communities, are you comparing different communities to see, to explain what the differences might be, or for example, attendance or achievement or child abuse? Is there any comparing communities? Are they mostly all have the same issues, or do some communities stand out in certain places?
Yeah, so I think there certainly are connections among issues, like we see, the communities that have high child poverty rates often have these other problems like child abuse and neglect rates, like chronic absence rates, because they're interconnected, sort of family trauma, family challenges that are manifesting themselves in lots of different ways. Another community that often has child abuse and neglect rates that are high is Woonsocket. West Warwick has had relatively high rates as well. So we see, again, those same communities are often struggling in a lot of areas that are often related to lack of family resources. One of the things that's really helpful to see is when a community really starts to do better. So like a community might see reductions in chronic absence and reductions in suspension rates, and then a commensurate increase in the high school graduation rate and college enrollment. And so they've tackled issues around school climate and school discipline and making sure kids feel engaged and supported in schools. And that's translated to improvements down the road in high school graduation and college access.
Let me ask you a question related to that, and also related to the bond issue in Newport this year for Rogers High School, or replacement of Rogers High School. In your experience, when you take a look at communities around the state, when a new school is built or when a new high school is built, is there an increase, an uptick in graduation rates, and also in the rates of kids going on to college?
So I haven't seen those specific, connections being made. I mean, there's a lot of sort of national research showing that kids and teachers are healthier, more likely to be engaged, less likely to miss school if they're in a healthy new school building. Also, I think it was really interesting when Newport invested in Pell Elementary School. They built it expecting a certain number of kids to come, and then people saw this beautiful elementary school, and people who had, I think, previously been sending their kids to private schools started sending their kids to this beautiful new elementary school. So I think it can also potentially change, who's attending, and obviously if you have a difference in who's attending, that can translate to differences in outcomes because the kids we're looking at are different.
Stephanie, is there some data that just can't be explained? For example, Newport's rate of asthma-related emergency department visits was 9.5 per 1,000 children, among the highest in the state, with the only rates for Central Falls, Providence, and Woonsocket higher. I mean, can everything be explained? Is there a reason that Rhode Island Kids Count finds that, or are you still looking for the answer?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are plenty of answers we don't have, but I do often connect the data on lead exposure or lead poisoning to the data on asthma hospitalizations and emergency department visits, because they're really often connected to the quality of housing. And if your community has a lot of poverty and a lot of older housing, then you have a lot of people who live in older, lower quality housing that may still have lead paint on it or lead dust in the soil, that may have mold or other kinds of issues that may translate into not just lead exposure, but also asthma. And asthma is also one of the leading reasons for school absences. So you can see how all of these issues are kind of intertwined.
Absolutely. And there is some good data in this report. I was looking through some of it, and one, for example, is 62% of Newport students who graduated class of 2018 immediately enrolled in college, up from 50% for the class of 2017. So it's not all bad news here from Rhode Island Kids Count. There is also some good data for Newport.
Yes, there definitely is. And we like to really make sure people have things to celebrate, as they often do, and not just issues to point out as problematic. And that was one of the ones I really highlighted. I think it was the last slide I presented at the presentation yesterday, wanting to end on a good note, but also it happens to be one of the last indicators in our fact book. And as I said, I think there have been a lot of investments in Newport around career and technical education, around youth involvement in schools. I think that hopefully will translate into improved high school graduation rates and continuation and improved college enrollment rates if we don't see challenges associated with the pandemic or potential loss of the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship, fighting against those improvements and keeping us from continuing on that path.
One of the unique aspects of Newport is the disparity in housing, where you can go from some low income and difficult housing to these mansions that are worth in the multi-millions of dollars, resulting in a probably I don't want to call it inaccurate, but a skewed view of what the median house price is or the average house price, either one, may be in the city, and ultimately having some kind of an impact on grants and other funding. Have you seen that, and how do we get over that dilemma?
So I know that, I think, as I said, there's a lack of recognition, from a lot of people that Newport has the sort of, there are these two Newports. There's this wealthy Newport, and then there's the regular people who are working in the restaurants or working in the hotels, who are supporting the service industry and the tourism industry in Newport. And those folks are not making a lot of money, and so they can't afford a lot for rent. Newport does have a pretty high percentage of affordable housing compared to other communities, but there's clearly a need for more. And I know there's a lot of advocacy in Newport to try to both address the homelessness challenge and also to try to provide more affordable housing to folks. and also make sure that that there are resources wrapped around that affordable housing for families.
This is a big question, and I don't know if you have the answer, and you probably wish you had the full answer and it was an easy answer. Everybody in the community wants these numbers to improve in the right way, go the right way, or continue going the right way. What can we all do, whether we have kids, whether we don't? What can we all do to help the city of Newport and everybody involved move these numbers in the right direction?
Yeah, so I think that the conversations like the one that's happening tomorrow are a really big part of the solution, because we need to get a lot of players together. We need to figure out what the city can do, what the schools can do, what businesses can do, what nonprofits can do to sort of wrap themselves around these children and families and provide these resources. It might be providing funding. It might be figuring out strategies to make sure that parents are connected to needed mental health services. It might be figuring out better transportation systems to get kids to school. And sometimes those require multiple sectors to get together. I think we're known as an organization that really tries to encourage people to make data-informed decisions. So I think people just, hearing these data on this program and through the presentation I did yesterday, I think if people have the data in their hands, they can hopefully make data-informed choices and not unintentionally pull resources away from an area that actually needs more resources.
Speaking of data, talk about the importance of the census and answering the census to this data.
Yeah, big question.
Yeah, no, that is a very timely one, because the census is still continuing through October, and a huge amount of federal resources flow to Rhode Island and to Newport, because that are based on the number of people that are counted. We see certain populations are often historically undercounted, like very young children are undercounted. People of color are often undercounted. People experiencing homelessness, and people who are just suspicious of the government tend to be undercounted. So it's really important that groups that work with individuals and families really make sure people know how they can participate. They can go onto the census website and fill in their census online. There's a phone number they can call that you can find on the census website, where you can call in and just talk to someone on the phone and fill it out on the phone. So it's not just filling it out on paper or having someone come to your home. There are other ways people can participate. And it makes a big difference in terms of how much money we get as a state and as a community, as well as our representation. I know Rhode Island is at risk of losing one of our 2 representatives. If we see either a decline in our population or not as large an increase as other states, we may see a state that's seeing a growth in population get a representative, and we might only have 1 representative in Congress after the census if we don't see a large enough number counted.
And the ramifications, people have to understand, it's not just for a year, it's for a decade.
It's true. I mean, at the beginning of the presentation, I presented the 2010 data, and it's 2020, and I'm still looking at the 2010 data. So it affects, the money we get, our representation. Also, groups not just like Rhode Island Kids Count, but businesses are using this data. Schools are using this data to project where they should, build roads, where they should build schools, how many new kids are likely to enroll in kindergarten based on how many little kids there are counted. And it also shows, we saw a pretty big change in Newport from 2000 to 2010 with a loss in the number of children, and also a much more diverse population, in particular, a real increase in the number of Hispanic or Latino children. And so that really, knowing that information makes you know that you need to do things like provide resources in Spanish as well as in English. And again, help schools and businesses and communities plan for the future.
So the report, if people want to see the data and information, it's right there on the bottom, right on Rhode Island Kids Count website, rikidscount.org. There's going to be a deeper dive into the data on Thursday, October 8th at noon. And you can find that information, I'm sure, at the same link. And those are the 2 important ones. Stephanie, what communities are next?
So we don't have any immediately scheduled. We usually do a few presentations in the spring and more of them in the fall. This is the first one we did on Zoom, so it was sort of a test to see how well it would work, because it's usually a super interactive conversation. And I think we did a pretty good job of making it that way yesterday in Newport. But we'll see. We often do these kind of presentations in Pawtucket and Woonsocket and Warwick, and we seek partners to co-host with. So if they request us to come and do this kind of presentation in their community, we would look for a partnership, a group that can then not just hear the presentation, but pull people together to act on the data and try to create change for kids and families.
Is there anything? Oh, go ahead, Frank. I'm sorry.
Well, when will your next Kids Count come out?
Our fact book will come out in April, as it comes out every year in April, but we do release a lot of other publications throughout the year. Since the fact book was released, we've already released publications on child poverty, childhood overweight and obesity, school climate, early learning, child abuse and neglect. So we're putting out publications all the time in between our annual fact books.
And all those found on your website?
They are. All of those can be found on our website.
Stephanie, is there anything from the data, from the report, information, or Rhode Island Kids Count that we didn't get to today that you would want to share? I know that's a huge question because you did an hour-and-a-half presentation yesterday, and we just had a half-hour conversation.
Yeah, so I guess the other thing I might share is that we did present a lot of data on access to high-quality early learning opportunities. And we know how much access to high-quality learning opportunities like those provided in Head Start and our Rhode Island Pre-K program help prepare students for success in school. So we did present data showing that 34% of all Newport children and 39% of low-income children are getting access to those programs. And providing greater access to those kinds of high-quality early learning programs, we hope will translate to, down the road, to increases in third grade reading, to high school graduation, because we know how much having a good start in education translates down the road to good educational outcomes.
Frank, you have anything else?
I just wanted to note, and I can't find it here real quickly, but I think you made a really good point about kindergarten education, and that how a number of people see it as a time for play. I've been doing that for a number of years, post kindergarten, and but how it's really a time for other development as well.
Yeah, and it's not that we're saying kids should sit quietly at their desks and do worksheets all day. A lot of learning in kindergarten and the early grades is really done through play, but it's important play. It's important learning that happens in those, and you set the stage for literacy. We know that kids who are not reading proficiently by the end of third grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. So having a high quality kindergarten experience, learning letters, learning sounds, learning to put words together, learning to think about numbers and counting, and the social emotional skills that you learn in a group setting, things like standing in line, listening, collaborating with other students are really important things to build on as you go into the future. And I thought of one more thing I didn't really highlight that much, that if I have a chance, I'd love to, which was I mentioned briefly that there was a pretty big increase in the number of multilingual learners that Colleen Germain had commented on. And I just think it's worth noting that I think from the 2014-15 school year to the 2018-19 school year, it went up, I believe, from 4% to, let me see if I can find that. I think it was from 4% to 14%, a really big change. From 5% in the 2014-15 year to 14%. And the number of multilingual learners, you can see this increasing line in Rhode Island, but the rate in Newport is going up even more. And there's a increase in people coming from other countries who are needing to learn English while also learning academic subjects. And an important need in Newport and statewide to make sure we invest in those kids who are our future, that we provide high quality learning experiences to give kids a good start so that they can, learn in their own language and in English and succeed in life.
Stephanie, does Rhode Island Kids Count or any of the partner organizations that you work with on this data and information present the report directly to local government officials or anybody else in the state, or is it their responsibility to seek it out?
So we have at our annual fact book release in April, we have the governor attends, the state agency directors attend, many members of the General Assembly attend, often the Speaker and the Senate President. So they and we that's where we try to get people to really think about kids We also, at all these Data in Your Backyard presentations, we try to have state officials. So there were at the presentation yesterday, I think there were 2 or 3 members of the General Assembly listening to the presentation that represent Newport and the surrounding communities, a couple of members of the City Council and School Committee as well. So people who are really in a position to take this data and translate it into policy decisions that can help children.
Excellent. And one more time, if anybody wants to see the entire report, which is detailed and lengthy, rikidscount.org. If you want to participate in the conversation that dives deeper, or at least watch it, you can find that information there as well. And we appreciate your time today and your organization doing this important work.
Thanks for having me. Great conversation.
It is great work, Stephanie. And it's I urge people to go and look at the report. It's fascinating, the information that's included.
Thank you so much. It was great to be on.
All right, Stephanie, thank you so much. And she is from RI Kids Count, very important report. And you can go and watch the presentation again in its entirety on that website. You can just get the report. However you seek to or best take information in, there's a way to do it. And of course, they're going to dive deeper into it all tomorrow, Mr. Prosnitz.
It's a great organization. They've been doing this for years. The data is sometimes disappointing, but really important. And you hope that our elected officials and various organizations take this to heart and see these as areas that we have to focus on to be able to improve things. And one thought that I had as we went through this is that Newport, like so many other communities in Rhode Island, is populated by a lot of older residents. We have a high rate of seniors in this state. And the question comes, why should I care? Because it's your children, it's your grandchildren, because it's the future of your city, of your state. And every generation should really focus and try to deal with these issues so that we have it's better for future generations.
And again, some of the key data points: 23.3% of Newport children are living in families in poverty. 68% of Newport public school students are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. 7.5% of Newport children due to enter kindergarten in the fall of 2021 have a history of elevated blood levels, higher than the state rate of 4.5%. Newport's rate of asthma-related emergency department visits is among the highest in the state. And the data just keeps going on. You can dive into it. You can see what they think and why and how they tie it all together. Data and facts, important in this day and age more than ever. And go seek it out. You know, during this political time of the year, there are candidates from the very top to the smallest office providing data and facts. Well, here are data and facts that you can use.
Well, and a quick note: when you have these political forums, often it'll be on Zoom or whatever. Hold these officials and these candidates feet to the fire. Ask them these questions. What are their solutions? What do they plan to do about these things? Especially with a lot of these with school committee candidates. We want to get people who are thinking with a vision.
That's it. Mr. Prosnitz, I'm going to ask you to hang on here. We'll have a quick conversation after we go end this broadcast. But first, let's preview what we have coming up tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, October 8th. It's Thursday, October 8th at 7 p.m. We're going to have a second ward candidate forum discussion with both candidates for Newport City Council second ward, and that is Kim Salerno and Charlie Holder. That conversation will start at 7 p.m. We are partnering with our friends at Top of the Hill Association as well as the Off-Broadway Association to present it. So we'll have a conversation with candidates tomorrow night. And then you and I are going to talk about 2 or 3 that we may have next week. And by this time tomorrow night, we should be able to announce what is coming next week. So let me wrap this up. Mr. Prosnitz, hang around for a minute. And on behalf of Frank Prosnitz, as well as myself and all of us here at What's Up Noop, I want to thank Stephanie Geller, who is the Deputy Director at Rhode Island's Kids Count, for joining us today. Again, rikidscount.org for all the information. We also have on whatsupnoop.com the entire presentation yesterday. You can go and watch it. Very important information. Thanks for watching today. We'll be back in 45 minutes here on the website as well as on our Facebook and on YouTube with the Governor's Weekly COVID-19 press briefing.